say welcome to everyone to this meeting of the Energy Policy Study Group for Commonwealth North. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to our co-chair, Marianne Peace, to introduce our speaker today. Marianne.
Wonderful, Juanetta. Thank you so very much. I want to start off by saying that Scott Waples is an incredible, knowledgeable professional in the transmission, electric generation, and power pooling fields. He's an associate, someone that I've worked with over the years, and he's also a friend. So I am just thrilled us here in Alaska. Scott has a BS in electrical engineering from Montana State University. He has a master's in electric engineering from the University of Idaho. He's a professional engineer in the state of Washington, and he has his human performance practitioner certification from the University of Idaho. He was formerly the head of planning and transmission and asset management at Avista Utilities, the publicly traded utilities down in Spokane. He was responsible for about $500 million of capital investment in the Avista transmission and distribution systems, and an additional $120 million in the BPA system. I love this part of his bio, and any of us that have been consultants will definitely be able to relate. Scott is the co-inventor of the ATR at Colstrip, which got 1,000 megawatts of new transfer capability for the plant. He received $5,000 for the work, and the Colstrip owners grossed about $23 million the first year of operation. Don't we love those stories? Wonderful. He has a ton of industry experience, and I'm not going to go into his lengthy resume, which we will post on the website as well. But I wanted to turn it over to Scott so he could start the presentation. I spoke with him earlier, and he said he does not mind if we interrupt him during the presentation, if we have burning questions that are relevant as he goes through his very data-rich slides. So with that, Scott, take it away.
Thank you very much, Marianne. So there's actually two presentations in this presentation. As those of you who joined a little bit ago heard a little bit, I'm not good at coloring within the lines, and so I have a presentation that is what I believe that you asked for, but I also have a presentation that is more what I'm hoping that you guys might want to hear. And so so we'll just go through the dull one first, because it's mostly history and the experiences in the lower 48 and the western half of the United States. We've been through many of these things over the last, 40 years, and some of them have worked, some of them haven't. I'm going to try to help you understand how that is. So, Marianne, if we could have the first slide, please.
Actually, Scott, I think I'm going to go ahead and do it because there's some latency problems with Marianne's connection. So
okay.
I'm going to do it.
Okay, great. Okay, so second slide, please. So this is a busy slide. Many of my slides are a little bit busier than I would have liked, but much of this you can read through yourselves. The situation is that governance has been pretty challenging in the West and the Northwest. Less so in California because the state just decided it was going to mandate some of these things, and they did. And so they control the California ISO. That brings some governance problems with it. And so that's California. Conversion to for WEC, let's go back to two. Yeah, conversion to an independent board for the Western Electric Association was more problematic because it required a couple of west-wide system blackouts, and then FERC had to come in and do some orders because people didn't want to change. And so so that took, well, 20 years. For the Pacific Northwest, again, the tension has been between the private companies and the state organizations and the federal government. Everybody wants to be in control. Everybody has different requirements and statutes. The federal government really can't give control or authority to a non-federal entity, so that's a problem. The PUDs and cities don't want to lose local control, and they don't want to become regulated by the FERC. And so the Northwest Power Pool, of which Marianne and I are both board members of, is a service corporation. It's going to be changed, it looks like, over the next couple of years, and it will become a FERC regulated entity. And so at least some transitions are going to happen. Please note that the successful models that I'm aware of require the transmission and generation, both of them, that the existing providers retain ownership and control. And so that's the case in California. That's the case generally for the ISOs and RTOs in the East also. Okay, slide 3, please. So one of the things that you folks were concerned about were governance models. There's 1,000 different governance models. You can do fully independent boards, which is probably what you want. You can have sector voting. There's all kinds of ways to do sector voting. And what I would recommend is that the voting be weighted towards those who pay, because in the West, the board changed the status from a 501c6 to a 501c3, which meant that it went from a members organization to a social benefits company, and perhaps that may be not what you want. And if there are questions about why I think that's an issue, we can talk about that more later. Again, term limits, some folks have term limits, some don't. But the real bottom line of this is that you need to make certain that the cost of governance and the cost of control doesn't exceed the ERO benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Which, yeah, okay, so we're not going to talk about it on the next slide. We're going to talk about integrated resource planning on the next slide. There are many mature models. Avista has them, Pacific Corp has them, Portland General has them. Everybody in the Northwest generally has integrated resource planning now. It's been successful for a long time. Generally, there are 2 staff functions, an independent staff and a policy or commission staff. It's generally not a pre-approval model. And so you can the companies can get guidance for the plan, but cost recovery is post-project completion. And so that's really important, I think. The resource planning has reduced cost in the Northwest and has helped move everybody towards the state's carbon reduction goals, while protecting the consumers' cost interests. And so I think it's mature. If a pre-approval model is used, which is one of the things that I think that you guys have thought about, there should be post-approval oversight to minimize cost overruns, but you can't have 2 bites at the apple and not allow cost recovery, because that's a good way to drive your companies into bankruptcy. So my leanings would be to the former rather than the latter model there. Okay, slide 5, please. You talked about standards. You want to talk about the NERC standards are mature and they're generally reasonable. You will find that there are a number of the standards that won't apply to the rail belt utilities. And so if you get into those standards, you really need to sort out what you really need because you don't need all of them. There are also numerous resources for understanding NERC standards. I've given some there. There are a large number of consultants that will help you through developing standards. If you need that to be done, I wouldn't recommend that. You can get consultants that will help you understand what the standards mean, what they say, why they will help you, how they can help you, but please don't reinvent the wheel. Okay, slide 6. So the ERO rules was one of the things that you guys wanted to talk about. I am confused a little bit about what the objectives are that you're trying to reach. And so is it reduced costs? Is it greater systems efficiencies? Do you want the government to have more control? Is there something else that I don't know? But you really need to understand what you're trying to achieve before you start writing new regulations. And so that gets to the thing that I alluded to before. If the costs don't exceed the benefits, the ERO could provide for standards, it could provide for compliance and coordinated transmission and resource planning, but it shouldn't own facilities. It shouldn't be involved in day-to-day operations. And the financials should be run before decisions are made, which leads us to the next slide, please. So coordination, you can have an RTO, you don't need an RTO maybe. Maybe what you want is a single transmission tariff. Maybe you want a resource adequacy program at some point. You might want to have better oversight or resource additions in the rail belt. You might want to look at a more efficient market, but you need to run the numbers. And you'll hear me say over and over and over about that because a cost benefit analysis for additional layers of control is something that really needs to be looked at, especially in a situation like you are in right now. The ISOs and the RTOs in the East, the savings generally came from reserve sharing and to some extent a market. But you guys have reserve sharing, and so most of those benefits or many of those benefits have already been captured. And so the benefits pie is the way I look at this, may be too small to cover the cost of a whole bunch of additional oversight. And so the bottom line of this is you need to understand the objectives and you need to run the numbers because you need to make sure that the consumers, your customers, are actually getting the benefits that you think that they will get with the additional oversight. And so I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions about that.
So you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or just turn on your camera and you'll pop to the top of the queue.
A question.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
My question, Scott, is you talk about making sure to do a cost-benefit analysis of any new management regime. Is the implication that although Alaska's system may be kind of cobbled together, we've covered most of the bases, we've recovered most of the benefits, we're doing an adequate job? Are you kind of saying if we're trying to nudge our way into the dance, we have to be careful whose toes we step on?
Yes, I would have put it perhaps a little bit differently than that because my toes get stomped on a lot. I think that's right. I think that when the companies do reserve sharing, and you've had to do reserve sharing, and you you want to have the most efficient system, and you want to have the lowest costs. But in my experience, oftentimes when people talk about an ERO or an RTO or an ISO in the lower 48, you've gone from a power pool that's had perhaps 15 or 20 people, and you end up with an organization that has 400 people, and all those people have to be paid. All those people have to have benefits and things, and the dollars that go into feeding the organization become very large. And so I would admonish and hope that you looked at the numbers before you leapt in with both feet into some sort of a regime that would be difficult to back out of, if that makes any sense.
Yes, thank you.
And Bernie?
Yeah, could you expand a little bit on the reserve sharing? I'm assuming that's basically just power pooling, or is it something else that is added to the power pooling? Because power pooling really makes a lot of sense to me. You're using the most efficient generation there on site, and it obviously eliminates the most costly one. And we have only, it would work very well in the south central side of things, where we have Chugach now, which took over MLNP, and MEA, which is the second largest utility. But I was just curious if that's just what you're talking about, or is there other kind of revenue sharings that falls into this item here?
Bernie, that's a good question. So to me, pooling is just as you say. It's trying to figure out what the least cost units that you want to run are. Reserve sharing to me is a different thing. Okay. Reserve sharing is protection against the loss of a unit somewhere, and it's based on transmission constraints, and so you may end up having to carry some reserves, which means an unloaded unit with a very expensive fuel source. And if you had less transmission constraints, or you were able to be within a larger bubble, if you will, you wouldn't have to spend so much money on those reserves. And so those are the things that I think that's where the savings have come. If you're running a unit at, pick a number, for 8,760 hours a year, and not really getting any generation out of it because you have to provide reserves, those numbers can add up. And so the rail belt's already doing this. I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe some enhancements to it. But the big numbers, you've already captured the big numbers, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions about any of those things? Okay, let's go to the next slide then. And the next slide. And one more slide. And so now we're in the next presentation, and this is the one where I get to have some fun because I've thought about the Alaska Rail Belt system for a while, and there are some things that occur to me that may have already occurred to you, but they're interesting things as I float around in my own brain here. And so I'm going to throw out a bunch of stuff. If you've already done them, or if you've already thought about them and found that they're not reasonable things to do, then that's all good. If there's things that you haven't thought about, then maybe we could have some more discussion. And so,
Hey, Scott,
in my view, yes.
before you go on, I think Ralph Townsend wanted to ask a question. Ralph, did you want to?
No,
Oh, okay,
Not here.
sorry.
Come on, Ralph, give me a question. Sorry. Okay, so in my head, the things that are the most interesting things, and I'm an engineer, and engineers are like this. The main goal is to make Alaska more industrially competitive, and energy independent. And so maybe there's some system enhancements that are inexpensive relative to other things that might be done. And of course, implementation of the easy projects, you should do those first, even if they're not the highest rate of return if you rank things, especially as we'll talk about in a little bit about the supply chain issues and trying to get some of these things done. So some potential projects that you might want to think about. There's some transmission between Homer and Anchorage, north of Bradley Lake, that's not being used. I understand why it's not being used, and we'll talk about that. I want to talk about using distribution as transmission in your systems. It's something that you wouldn't see this in the lower 48, but I think that there's a unique opportunity to do that for you. I'd like to talk about a couple of new generation options that you may not have considered. Electrification of the rail system helps some things that you have indicated that you're interested in. And then there's a thing I want to talk about, small wind projects for some of the non-interconnected loads, and some things that I've thought about for that. And then as a long-term goal, having a savings fund to fund new projects, and the savings that you got from some of these other ideas would go into a fund, and then you could use them to build new projects. So that's what I'd like to talk about. So let's go to the next slide, please.
Okay, and Dan has a question for you as we.
Yes.
And Scott, I don't mean to, if you're going to answer the question, I apologize, but I'm not as familiar with the subtleties of terminology. What do you mean by transmission as distribution?
We will see.
Okay.
And then if it's not made clear, jump me and make sure that I'm clear. Okay, so let's talk about first the Homer to Anchorage transmission. In the past, when you have a large transmission line next to a smaller transmission line, if the big one falls down, the small one gets smoked. And so oftentimes people have decommissioned the lower voltage lines so that they didn't get burnt down. And I believe that that's what has happened north of Bradley Lake. There are new technologies, well, they aren't even so new anymore, that provide electronic flow control, and that could be applied to the 50 kV line. It could be put back in service and maybe eliminate some of the transmission constraints north of Bradley Lake. And in my old company, we used a thing called SCADA variable limits for equipment that was thermally constrained. And what that means is of course, the colder it gets, and sometimes it gets cold up there, the more utilization you can get out of your equipment. And so that's what I would propose to look at there. You may get better utilization of Bradley Lake. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later too. But as everyone up there is clearly aware, there's a creek diversion project that could increase megawatt hours at Bradley. And if that bottleneck is relieved, that might become more financially viable. Additionally, we're talking about reserves within a larger transmission bubble. And so maybe Bradley, and again, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. Maybe Bradley becomes a lower cost unit that you could use for reserve sharing and not have to burn natural gas or naphthalene or other fuels. And so that's one thing that I would suggest you looking at. Again, you need to run financials for all of this, because we don't want to layer additional costs on our customers. Okay, next slide, please.
Hey, Scott, I have a question if you.
Yes.
Going back to the transmission bottleneck that we have from Bradley Lake to Anchorage, there is a project going on right now that the BMPC and the utilities on Railbelt are looking at to increase the transmission power right now. And Kurt Warren with AEA is online. If he wants to discuss that a little bit further, I would happy to hear his advice, because they've been looking at it for quite a while, and it's expensive. And with the new infrastructure funding that's coming to our state, we're going to probably be able to use part of that money to increase that power, a transmission line coming up. So I didn't know if Kurt wanted to jump in right now. Kurt?
Yeah, Bernie, thank you. And sorry I'm late, Scott. You've been hyped up and everybody was excited to come and watch this. So in any case, the reason I'm late is I was at a BPMC meeting. Bernie, it's probably a little premature, as I do not know that the BPMC has passed resolutions on the acceptance of the host of projects. But in general, Scott, the concept is that the Kenai Peninsula is going to be unconstrained. We will do some routing studies to look at parallel paths or alternate paths off the Kenai. And in essence, create a transmission system upgraded from 115 or 230 in disparate locations, as CEA is working just north of the Kenai Peninsula to upgrade their system to 230. So commensurate with that, we're looking at unconstraining the Kenai Peninsula to 230 and going into a host of routing studies to ensure the best paths off. And I hope that's good enough of an overview.
Yeah, those are really good things to do. Electronic flow control, you may find might be cheaper and well, cheaper in the near term, and something that you could do relatively quickly as you waited for the upgrades for the to go from 115 to 230, for an example. And so it also may be that you have a second line that goes somewhere, and you have that one constructed at 230 kV, and then you leave the first one at 115 until you can get the funding to upgrade it, and maybe you use electronic control on that so it doesn't, as I was alluding to before, get scorched when the big one falls down. We had in the Avista system, we had a situation where there was an underlying 115 kV system, and the Bonneville Power Administration constructed a 500 kV system over the top of it, and then they didn't put redundant 500 kV in, and so when the 500 went down, the The 115 went to 350 or 400% of its line ratings instantaneously. Of course, that doesn't work. And so we looked at electronic flow control. We ended up not doing it because back then it was too expensive. Otherwise, we would have, I think. And so we just opened up the transmission, the underlying transmission, and then Bonneville provided additional transfer capability for us in their 500 instead of in our 115 system. And so that's how that was able to be done when it was two disparate companies. If it would have been one company, it wouldn't have mattered because the lines would have been open and the contracts would have not mattered. But that's kind of where some of these thoughts have come from. Other questions about that? Okay, now to 12, please. So here's the thought about distribution as transmission. And so copper is king. Copper Valley is not with the rail belt. My understanding, and this could be wrong, but my understanding is that there are some distribution lines from Copper Valley that are close to Fairbanks, and there are also close to Fairbanks. And so one could connect them with electronic flow control. And if you got 5 megawatts or 10 megawatts of additional transfer capability for an emergency from the top of the system to the bottom of the system, it might be useful for you. And you could displace higher cost generation. CVE could participate in the energy market to whatever extent that develops. There's opportunities then probably for additional reserve sharing. You may be able to share units on reserve if there are fewer transmission constraints, transmission being used very generously here. And so what I would recommend would be looking at this, studying the potential for additional distribution enhancements between the companies for higher transfer capability. But also if you have a situation or situations within the rail belt as it exists, you may do the same thing, and for emergency operation only, have distribution being back up your transmission. And so again, you want to run the financials for this, but there may be some opportunities because the electronics have just gotten better and better and better and better. And you may be able to control the flow to where the operation of the larger system, the main system, can't negatively impact the distribution system, but you end up getting some additional transfer capability out of it. And so that's the idea. Is that clear? Or are there questions about that?
Well, I'll comment. I think the obvious benefits of interconnectivity are clear. And as you say, that could result in access to the market, displacing a higher cost energy and so forth. I guess I'm an amateur at this. I'm sorry, Scott, but electronic flow control and so forth, you're saying basically we're able to squeeze more electrons through a pipe within thermal constraints and technical constraints, just getting more out of the system. Is that what you're saying?
Yes and no. More out of the system, yes. But what I'm saying is if you have a really big pipe in parallel with a really small pipe, the really big one falls down, the really small one just gets hammered. And so electronic flow control would be to effectively put a valve on that flow so that it wouldn't burn up the facilities.
Gotcha.
Uh-oh. Is Scott frozen or is it only on mine?
No, he's frozen. He mentioned that
The
there's some
ability
link issues with his connection. He's coming back now. Go ahead, Scott. You just froze up on us a little bit.
Oh, okay, so I'll just back up just a little bit. So you got the big pipe and the small pipe. The small pipe gets nailed, and if it doesn't have any way to put a valve on it, those facilities would burn up. And so if you can use electronic flow control, you can clamp the flow through the distribution system at a level that it won't burn up. And so then you can transfer a small amount of energy, perhaps through Copper Valley, where it wouldn't have been able to have been done way. And so that's where these benefits would come if it can be done. And again, I don't have a good picture in my head of where all of the distribution is. I have a better picture of what the transmission looks like in my head. But I think that this might be something that could be absolutely unique to the rail belt and the systems in Alaska. And it would be a real novel way of increasing transfer capability, perhaps at a pretty reasonable cost. Other questions?
Let's move on because we only got about 20 minutes, Scott.
Okay, 13. So again, let's talk about generation. This is something that maybe you guys have thought about, maybe you haven't, putting pump storage at Bradley Lake. You could better integrate the wind. The University of Alaska might want to help study some of this stuff. You could use wind energy to cover the pumping generation and transmission losses. And I don't know about how many hard rock mines there are in Alaska, but there is a look at hard rock mines in North Idaho right now. And they're looking at putting pumped hydro in those mines. Some of them are 4 or 5 miles deep. You don't need a whole lot of water if you've got a lot of head like that. And so that's something that you may want to think about. And so that could be, if there's no transmission bottlenecks, that could be also a potential for changing how you run your reserves. Electrifying the rail system. This is something, it provides more load. It provides benefits for the state because it can be green tourism. The other routes could be electrified when funds come. The pump storage and the wind could help levelize and cover the new load. Again, University of Alaska might be interested in helping with that. The rail load could be used for non-spinning reserves. The rail, depending upon how the control systems worked, you could use dynamic load shedding and cover more reserves. And then once the rail electrification is complete, there's a line, a small Fairbanks to Anchorage, and that could be used for backup, emergency backup also. Also because rail engines are diesel and they drive electric motors. If they were configured properly, you could use them to provide emergency backup anywhere along the rail belt, and that might be something that might be interesting and could save some money too. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We can come back to that if there's questions. And so wind integration events, this is something that Marianne said that you were really interested in. And here's what I think. Is this a problem for one company? Is it a problem within one transmission bubble and you guys are going to fix the transmission constraints and it will become less of an issue in our system? Of course, a larger system helps. That's where Copper River integration would come in. Fast pumped hydro, absolutely. Bradley Lake or where fast hydro could be done. Larger controlled load helps. So the rail electrification helps with that. Load shedding, generator dropping, those things help. I think you're already doing those things. Down in the lower 48, people are talking about controlled air or natural gas compression for wind events. And once they get the natural gas or the air compressed, they use it in their gas turbines, which increases the efficiency a lot. And then additional wind in different wind sheds. So you got some on the coast, you got some interior, they're in different wind sheds. Alaska's a big place, and so there ought to be more than just one wind shed, and that can help. And so those are the kinds of things that that were I the king, I would be looking at. Other interesting things. So there are small commercially available wind generators. And there are a couple that I know of, 10 or 15 kilowatts. They got 3 moving parts, so they don't require a lot of maintenance. They make quite a bit of energy a year. You pair one of those with smart controls and maybe the batteries in an electric truck. And then you provide that to some of the villages. They need transportation, clearly. That would help with the transportation problem. They may not have to import 2 tons of liquid fuels then, and then the battery could smooth out the wind. And again, this is something that I think would be a lot of fun to work on. And the University of Alaska, the professors there might think that this would be a fun thing to do too. And so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the pooling. That I think is pretty clear. So timelines, what could be done? Distribution is transmission. I think in 12 to 24 months for increased transfer is not out of the question. And then once you get that done, it'd take some time to hammer out the reserve sharing and make sure that the right units were on reserve sharing. The Homer to Anchorage transmission, again, probably the same time frame. I think the Bradley pumped hydro, maybe a little bit longer. There'd be some necessity for some environmental impact statements and some things that you otherwise wouldn't have to do with the transmission. Rail electrification, you know, I'm just grabbing numbers out of the air, 2 to 5 years, don't know. And then the work on the small villages, you know, 2 to 4 years, maybe initial implementation for 1 or 2, just to see how it would work in a couple of years, or maybe even quicker if you could get the equipment. And so next slide, please. So the other ideas, I know that you guys have thought about this, but I had to put it in. Get serious about weatherization, especially in the small villages, so that you can minimize the energy expenditures there. We talked about compression of natural gas or air, displaced pipeline loads with wind and smart controllers if you're burning oil or gas to do those. And then hydrogen or green gas, you guys have thought about that too, but it requires additional load, which means there may be some benefits for adding the load that could be used for that too. And so that's the other crazy ideas bucket. And so your mission, should you decide to accept it, for those of you who are old enough to remember that, of course, you'd want to prioritize the projects. You'd want to talk about project scope and definitions. There's study work that would have to be done, because you got to do the study work in order to figure out what the financials look like. Construction estimates also clearly are required for financials, the savings fund that we talked about, and then get the construction going and reap the benefits. And so next slide, please. This is in the just so that you know bucket. I formed a nonprofit company, and the goals for that nonprofit company are to begin doing research on pairing wind and other generation. In my case, it will be some solar and some small hydro on a 240 volt grid that I'm constructing. I'm good. My intent is to start some research. The schools, I'm talking to a couple. Well, I'm working with a couple of schools, but the professors, some of them took 40% pay cuts. The main guy that I was working with is going back into industry because he needs to pay the bills. But this coming year, it looks like I may be getting some students to work on some of this stuff. So I have skin in the game for some of the ideas that I'm asking you to at least consider. And so that's where I'm going to end for today. Please ask questions.
Great, thank you. I'm going to just invite everybody, since we have a manageable size group, if you want to just go ahead and turn on your cameras, raise your hand, do ask any questions. And you can always submit them in the chat as well. I'll be happy to.
This is Mary Ann. If you could share with us on the team here, and there are people that cover all aspects of all the different utilities and, as I said, the legislature, et cetera. If you were to give any advice on, from your experience, your decades of experience, what are some of the things that Alaska should avoid? I mean, what would be the 3 fatal flaws of what we're trying to accomplish? And, you know, we have the wonderful legislative kind of opportunity here to bring the utilities together to optimize the resources and the transmission. We've got the regulatory commission, we've got the consumers. So what are 3 things we should avoid? And what would be your 3 greatest opportunities for us here today?
3 things to avoid. The first thing would be to put a bunch of legislation and controls in and expect a bunch of savings to flow from them without doing financial analyses. And so, you know, controls are really important. But if you don't look at what you get for what you're trying to do, excuse me, that would be something that I wouldn't do. The second thing I wouldn't do is squander the opportunities that you have with the money that's coming from the federal government. My recommendation would be, and I don't mean by squander them by just letting them, you know, drop through the floor. What I would do is I would look at the low-hanging fruit, like I said, and the highest rate of return projects, and do that. The third thing that I would not squander, from what, so I've never worked with them, but from what I can tell, the University of Alaska has some smart folks, and they're doing some pretty interesting things, and I wouldn't squander that brain trust either, because I think that Alaska is in a unique position. Our friends in California do a similar thing, but they do it because they have so many earthquakes there, and so they have the students work on earthquake kinds of things. I would rather see the University of Alaska students working on energy kinds of things, and I know you guys have earthquakes too, but let the Californians figure that out. And so those are the things that I would not squander. The biggest opportunities, I think, are maybe making the rail belt bigger with Copper Valley. And from that flows a larger system, more inertia, better reserve sharing, lower costs, maybe for a lot of different consumers. And it also may make it so that people are less exposed to big transmission outages and freezing to death, because I'm from Montana. It gets cold in Montana too, and we have had people freeze to death because bad things happen. And so that, and I think that the last one, the one that intrigues me the most, because it's halfway there already, is electrification of the rail. And that is because the locomotives already have electric motors in them, and that's what they use. And so that may be something that could provide some pretty good benefits. Electric locomotion is generally cheaper than diesel locomotion or other fossil fuel kinds of propulsion. And so that's what I would say. And again, I'm not as close to the problems as you guys all are. And so if I'm going like this, you can ignore it. But that's what I would see.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott.
Gary, did you have a question?
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to get my hand put up, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. But at any rate, Scott, a very interesting presentation. I am an electrical engineer also, and have been involved in the rail belt quite a number of years. We did establish some NERC-like standards in 2020, so that's a big hands up to all the people that participated, and some of those are on this call as well. But at any rate, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have, aside from all the things that you pointed out, is our communities are not, the distribution systems are not connected, like to the Kenai Peninsula and to Copper Valley and to Fairbanks. So those are kind of limited, but I think the cost of the energy is really our biggest challenge. It's 50% of the cost of generation. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. So for instance, our natural gas price is probably 3 or 4 times the Henry Hub price. So do you have any thoughts on how we might achieve lower cost of energy in Alaska? Thank you.
Absolutely. And if you were to think back to the slide about how you put all this stuff together, if you can get Copper Valley connected, if you can get some of the transmission constraints resolved, if it makes sense from a financial basis to do pumped hydro at Bradley Lake or other places, if you can do energy storage like that, and I hate generally I hate batteries. I don't think that that's the way to do things. I think that pumped hydro is absolutely the best way to do things. It's old technology. Everybody understands it. Our civil engineering buddies actually can do this stuff without breaking a bunch of stuff. And so that's what I think is the best thing. If you do that, then you can use wind or other cheaper things that you don't have to continually burn fossil fuels, and you can lower those costs because it's just an energy game. If you can pump cheap energy into the system and not have to run gas turbines, that's a really good thing. And again, I'm not close enough to the problem to be able to actually sit down and pencil it out on the back of an envelope. But to the extent that you can get, once the capital costs are done, of course, wind energy is pretty low cost. And so if you can pump that kind of stuff in and not have to burn naphthalene or natural gas or diesel fuel, it's going to be easier, and that provides, I think, extra benefits. And then if you can electrify the rail, again, that kind of thing, if you can use the energy to drive the trains that you get from not having to burn stuff, I think that helps. And so maybe that's a little bit too simplistic, but I would use wind when I could.
Okay, let's go to John Springsteen and then we'll come back to Dan.
Hi, good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon.
Can you speak to challenges you've experienced or that you've seen in successfully incorporating intermittent renewable sources like wind and solar into a grid? Absolutely.
So the things you want to do are, you want a high load factor. And so if you can pair wind and solar, or wind and something else, that's better. Larger inertia systems are always better because the wind events don't hit you as hard. Diversification of wind. So the thing that I was talking about, different wind sheds. If you have a wind event that comes in and all the coastal generation comes up, and as it starts to tail off, the wind in the center of the state picks up, that would help. And making sure that your largest inertia units are on reserves, that helps too. You can in my so I just have to tell you, when I was on the other side of the meter, when I was on the working for Avista, I had a different viewpoint of it than that I have now that I've stepped away from that. Avista always claimed that wind was bad, solar was bad, everything's bad. And it's partly because if you displace things like that, then there's investment challenges for an IOU, investor-owned utility. And so there's pushback, there's some pushback with that. They can, so loads are variable, wind is variable, solar is variable, but we all know how to take care of the variability of the load. And so a little bit better wind forecasting models help, a little bit better solar forecasting models help, higher load factors help, larger inertia helps. And so those are the things I think that help you integrate wind and solar and the rest. Inertia is really good. Dan.
Yeah, real quick, this is fascinating stuff. And Scott, you're obviously an engineer and you deal with practical solutions. I respect that. And politics and policy can often be less informed by facts and technology. But so I'm going to ask you this comment. Can you see from your technical perspective, are there any policies or politics or regulations or laws in Alaska that are inhibiting our ability to take advantage of some of the technological fixes and advantages you speak of, like electrifying the rail system, more distributed, and integrating CVA, that kind of stuff?
You're going to hate me, Dan. So one of the things that I enjoy more than probably anything else that I have ever done in my career is to find and train young engineers. And so it took me a long time to learn this, but I talk about the 3 Ps: the physics, the physics can always be done. You can build a line from here to there, and a good engineer, and sometimes even a bad engineer, can get you there. The second P, the first P is the physics. The second P is the financials. And so the financials, maybe you have to go around a park. So you can't go right through the park. So the financials have to be bigger. And so sometimes they will fail a project, even though the physics would have made it work. And then the last one is the politics. And maybe you're going to build a line around a park, but you have to build a boat ramp, because that's what the politics require. And the young engineers look at me like I have another hand growing out of my forehead when I say, yep, you may have to build a boat ramp. Well, it doesn't have anything to do with the transmission. It has everything to do with the transmission. And so to your point, there are probably laws that get in the way, and there are probably policies that get in the way, but I'm not close enough to be able to look at them to tell you which ones. Anything that inappropriately, and I mean that absolutely, inappropriately require more permitting than necessary, and more time for permitting than necessary, is always really hard, because it makes the financials fail often. And so those are the things that concern me the most. But having not knowing what your state statutes look like, and what the overall regulation for the system is, I don't have a good feel for that.
That's great. Thank you for that. That's great.
Thanks, Scott. We have a question in chat from Crystal Inkfist with Alaska Power Association. She's asking about your thoughts on micronuclear projects in Alaska. We've heard a lot about the potential of those recently, and Senator Murkowski seems to be a great advocate for it. So what's your experience with that and your thoughts about it?
So I had I had a plane ride with the president of Pacific Corp, who is putting a micronuke in Wyoming, and we had a nice chat about that. And so I think that it's a very interesting idea. I think that if you need energy, it's a really interesting idea. So this is just me personally, and I don't know what the politics are, and I don't know what the funding mechanisms are, and I always like to get money for projects like that. But an old supervisor of mine said to me once, we don't want to be first, and we don't want to be fifth. We want to be 26th. And so by the time the 26th one is around, and all the bugs have been worked out, and everybody, it's a calm thing. Nobody's excited about it. There's nobody bringing pitchforks to go after you. And so I said, well, why not 27th? And he said, because 26 is the number. So it's like 3. I don't know.
That's the second time this week that I've heard somebody say, from a policy perspective, don't be the first one out of the chute. Wait for the other guys to take the bullet for you, and then
exactly right. And I like that. I like that idea because, quite frankly, I've been shot at enough, and early on in my career, my Kevlar vests weren't very good, and so I took a number of bullets for those, and you learn from those things, and so not maybe the first.
Yeah.
if it goes well in Wyoming, and if Bill Gates wanted to come to Alaska and give the state a bunch of money, just like he's given Pacific Corp a bunch of money, then absolutely. And if there's enough money to cover the potential decommissioning costs, then count me in. Absolutely. But those are the kinds of things that you got to be thinking about, making sure that there's enough cash to unwind the thing if it goes south on you.
Sure. I don't know, Scott, we're rugged individualists in Alaska. We just don't take a handout. Wink, wink.
Well, here's a personal account. I'm from Montana, and I'm willing to shoot anybody that comes on our property too, just because I think that'd be a good idea sometimes. But having said that, we had a gravel pit that we used and the state used on our property, the property that I grew up on. And when the gravel pit closed, the state expected us to remediate it and to put the grass back in and things, and it wasn't our gravel. I mean, it wasn't, we weren't making a ton of money. The state was taking the gravel, and so we had a big battle on who was going to remediate the gravel pit, and so I'm a little bit sore over that business, and so that's what I'd say.
All right, Bernie, did you have one last question? No? Okay, all right. Okay, well, I don't see any additional questions. Scott, any closing comments, Marianne?
No, I really appreciate, Scott, you coming on here. As all of us know, there are always lessons to be learned. Your experience in the Pacific Northwest, we greatly appreciate you sharing that with us. We will not have a revolving door where we'll keep calling on you every week to come back with additional comments, but you are an incredible source. And Dan Sadler, I know, and others on the call, I hope they do reach out to you, because we're in the infancy of what we're doing, and the Pacific Northwest has been there, has gone through the pitfalls. And I really think that the opportunities to learn from our sister states is very important. And we greatly appreciate it, Scott. And thank you for your time on the call today.
Absolutely. I hope this has been useful. So I will say that that the best way to get a hold of me is generally by email, even though that fails sometimes. I've had recently some problems. I texted a friend of mine in Montana, trying to get some project estimates from him for some things that I'm doing, and they all reflected back. And then he tried to send me an email, and that got reflected back. And so if you can't get a hold of me, just keep trying, or have enlist Marianne's help, because she can often get a hold of me, and so I'm willing to help where I can, because I think that truly I think that everybody deserves a chance. Everybody, which is one of the things that why I am interested in the smaller villages and the work that might go there. Everybody needs a chance and deserves a chance to be able to make it, and to be able to make Alaska more competitive is something that I think is near and dear to my heart too, because we have the same issues in Montana, and we're kind of like brothers and sisters here, and so best of luck, and if I can help, I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks,
All right.
Scott. Just a reminder to everybody online, we do have a session on February 25th. We may have one before then. I haven't finalized the scheduling on that. And I just wanted to say also, Scott, every time you said that you come from Montana, I wanted to follow up with I wear a bandana. If you know the song.
Well, I don't, and I never did. You know, my horse let me get on without a bandana. I don't know.
Well, we started with singing, so I thought we might wrap up with singing, but at any rate, thank you so much
Well
for your
played.
time. All right,
bet.
all right. Take
All
care.
right, see you, everybody.
Take care. Thank
Mm.
you.